Good morning, students, or rather, good afternoon. Today is Thursday, 2 September 2021. This will be our second lecture for this week. Um, Let me remind you of how we're doing things this semester. Some of you are not paying attention, apparently. I told you several times, both in letters to you sent through MyMav and on my videos that I've posted so far. I told you that there will be no in-class meetings until at least 9 September. That is 1 week from today. Until then, the instruction will be online. I've said that so many times, I just cannot believe that somebody hasn't heard me or doesn't know it. So we're going to be doing online lectures today and again Tuesday. Next week, whatever the provost decides, I will be back in the classroom. Now remember, we don't know what the provost will decide. The provost has said everyone must be tested for COVID by the 8th of September. So I assume that the provost will be deciding at that time what we'll do as a university going forward. There are three logical possibilities. One possibility is that we will go entirely online, the way we did the past academic year. I don't think that's all that likely, but it is a possibility. The second possibility is that we will go back into the classroom full time, just like we've always done all the years previous to the year of COVID, okay? Where we would meet twice a week in the classroom. I would lecture to you live. You can then ask questions, and then the class will end, and you go off to your next class. So that's a possibility. I'm inclined to think that that's not likely. It's possible, but not probable. And the reason for that is the numbers, the COVID numbers, are, if anything, getting worse, not better. If we're already doing the 50-50 or hybrid approach, it's not likely that we're going to be going back to full-time in the classroom. Okay, so where does that leave us? The provost probably, in my opinion, will continue doing what we're doing now. Now, what are we doing now? We're supposed to be meeting with half the students in one of our weekly classes and the other half in the other class. In other words, we can't meet with all of the students in the same classroom. The classroom is too small and people would be too close together. So the way to avoid this high density classroom is to see to it that only half of the students appear on the first day, which is Tuesday, and the other half appear in class on Thursday. So I assume that the provost will probably continue with this. Now, I do plan to go back into the classroom, even if that's the decision. But what we do in the classroom is up to me. I could lecture live each day and record what I lecture on for the students who weren't there that day. In other words, I would be needing to make a recording of each lecture. But I'm doing that already. I'm going to continue lecturing from home, as I'm doing right now. And I'm going to post it as soon as it's done. I'm going to post it on Canvas. So all of my students, all of you, will have access to the exact same lecture. And since I'm going to be coming to class, you may be wondering, what will I do when I come to class? I'm going to play the lecture on the screen in the classroom. It's the same lecture I would be giving if I were in the classroom lecturing live. So, starting a week from today, the 9th of September, I will be in the classroom at the usual time and place. And you know what that time and place is because it's on the syllabus, which is posted on Canvas. I'm going to go to the classroom a week from today, and half of my students, half of you will be there, depending on your last name. Go back and read my letter posted on Canvas of the 22nd of August. I explained there that students whose last names begin with A through, now I don't know offhand, I could find it, but it's in the letter. I think it's A through J, but check the letter to make sure. If your last name begins with any of those letters, you come to class every Tuesday from now, from that point forward, from the 9th forward. If your last name begins with any of the other letters, then you will always come to class on Thursday, starting next week on the 9th of September. So, once again, starting on the 9th of September, I will be in the classroom with half of you. I will play the video that I have already recorded for you in the classroom. You will sit there and watch it. If there's any time remaining when the video is over, you can ask me questions. And that's exactly what we would be doing in the classroom in the old-fashioned way. Okay, so that's the way it's going to be all semester if the provost decides to continue with this 50-50 or hybrid approach to teaching. Now, do you have to come to class starting next Thursday? You do not. I do not take attendance. That means that it won't hurt you in any way if you choose to stay home and watch the videos from home. After all, if you come to class, that's all we'll be doing in the classroom. You'll be watching the video. There will be no conversation, at least until the video is over. And then, as I said, you can ask me questions. We can have perhaps a short discussion among you. Okay, so that's the plan. Until the 9th, I'm going to continue simply posting these lectures with no in-class meetings. Okay, that'll all change next week, a week from today, on the 9th of September. All right, I've posted a number of items on Canvas. You need to check Canvas every day, at least once. Maybe make it a point to check it first thing in the morning, or perhaps last thing in the evening before you shut your computer down for the day. But you need to go there at least once every day, because I'm constantly posting new items. Not just these videos, such as the one I'm doing now, but handouts and readings. Canvas is the place where all the materials for the course will be located. So here's what's currently posted on Canvas. I'll give you a brief explanation. The syllabus for the course, the reading list for the course. There was that letter that I just mentioned on 22nd August, in which I explained the course and what we'll be doing. I have also posted the reading by William Alston, his encyclopedia entry. We discussed that in the most recent lecture before today. I posted an optional reading, which is a short biographical entry on William Alston. And whenever I say optional reading on Canvas, that's what it means. It's up to you whether you read it. I recommend that you read it, but I won't ask you any exam questions about it. In this case, I assume you're interested in the authors. You may want to know a little bit about the author of that encyclopedia entry, William Alston. If so, read the 2 or 3 page biographical entry about him. So that's optional. I also posted another optional item. It's a newspaper story about the increasing religiosity, if you will, of people around the world. It's by an author named Sherwood. The title is Religion, Why Faith is Becoming More and More Popular. It's optional, but I assume you'll be interested in it. I posted a taxonomy of religions that I prepared for you, in which by now you should have looked at, and there may be exam questions on it, so study it carefully. I posted a short written document that I prepared for you called What is a Bachelor? And the point of that is not so much that you understand what a bachelor is, but that you see how philosophers proceed. Philosophers very often try to discover and state necessary and sufficient conditions for the application of certain concepts, such as bachelorhood or religion. And that's what Alston was trying to do in his encyclopedia entry. He came to the conclusion that none of the definitions that have so far been offered do in fact state necessary and sufficient conditions for the application of the concept religion. But that's what he was trying to do. The next item I posted were my lecture notes on Alston's encyclopedia entry. And I plan to post lecture notes for each of the readings this semester for you to help you follow along in the readings, to help you understand the readings. I then posted the reading for today and also for Tuesday. We're going to spend 2 days discussing an essay by Walter Stace entitled Man Against Darkness. We're going to get started on that in just a couple of minutes. The next item is a short biographical entry on Stace, written by a man named Smith. That's optional, but once again, I encourage you to read it. The next item I posted are my lecture notes on Stace's essay. They were posted yesterday, and they'll be up there all semester. You can, in fact, if you want, while you're watching the video, you can follow along, because my lecture in these videos will obviously follow my lecture notes. That's what they're for. They're to help guide me through the material, and you can follow along if you want to. The final thing that's posted, at least the most recent item that I posted, is an article that was mentioned by Stace in his article. It's an article by the famous British philosopher Bertrand Russell, and the title is The Free Man's Worship. It was published by Russell in 1903. So Russell provided the inspiration for Stace, whose article appeared in 1948, several decades later. So since Stace mentions Russell, and since Stace's essay is a takeoff on Russell, I thought you'd like to read the original essay that inspired Stace. It's by Bertrand Russell. So those are the items currently posted on Canvas. There will be more. In fact, later today, I plan to post an item on teleology, which is our topic for today, one of our topics for today. And in the next day or so, or certainly over the weekend, I plan to post an article or a writing by Michael Crichton, the novelist, who argues that there's a new religion in the world today, the religion of environmentalism. It's a very provocative essay, and I thought that I would bring it to your attention, because Stace is going to be talking in his essay about the death of religion or the decline of religion in the modern world. Maybe other religions are coming into existence, and perhaps environmentalism is one of them. Now, whether environmentalism really is a religion takes us back to Alston's essay. Remember, Alston seemed pessimistic or skeptical, at least, that communism is a religion. It may have similarities to religions like Christianity, but there are also some profound differences. So maybe, all things considered, we should not think of communism as a religion. And maybe the same thing should be said about environmentalism. Even though it has similarities to religions like Christianity, there are also significant differences. So maybe in the end, we should not think of it as a religion. So let's get started. I brought in a couple of images of Stace. I'll just hold them up. If this were in the classroom, I would pass this around. This is Stace late in his life, obviously, a couple of pictures of him. And I think I found these on Google image search. So if you want, you can type in Walter Stace image in Google or some other search engine, and it'll bring up images like this, and you can see what he looked like. This is my copy of the essay by Stace. You can see it's all marked up. Stace has sections. He divides the essay up into parts. You can see I have a yellowed numeral 1 right here. That's part one of Stace's essay. On the next page, you'll see part two, and it goes on. There are, as I recall, 5 different sections. Yes, 5 sections in this essay. Unfortunately, Stace doesn't give them titles. He could have said section 1 and then given a title for that section. He didn't. So in my lecture notes, I supplied a title. And I chose a title based upon what he actually says in that section of the essay. So let me get my lecture notes out, and so we can get going. By the way, you should follow along on the reading list. There it is. The reading list, once again, I'll hold up my notebook. You should get a loose leaf notebook like this so you can stay organized. You can see that the topic for today is W.T. Stace, Man Against Darkness. Now, his name was Walter. He published this essay with his initials. If you look at the first page of the essay, it says W.T. Stace. But I call him Walter Stace because that was his name. Sometimes he published under his full name, not just W.T. Stace. So, in my reading list, I used the name that was actually used in the article or book. So, stay on top of things. Today we're doing the first part of Stace, and if you look at the reading list, you can see that on Tuesday, 7 September, we're going to finish the essay by Stace. It's long enough that we need 2 class periods to cover it. There will be times this semester where we need more than 2 class periods to cover something. If you look down the reading list, you'll see that we're going to spend 3 class periods, or at least parts of 3 class periods, on the famous essay by William Rowe entitled The Problem of Evil and Some Varieties of Atheism. So how many days we spend on a particular article or book depends on how long it is and how much material there is in it to be covered. So let me turn to my lecture notes now. You can follow along because I have posted these for you. I begin my lecture notes with some biographical information about Stace, 3 items in fact. The first is from that encyclopedia entry that I posted on Canvas that I recommended you read. It's written by James Ward Smith, and I simply copied and pasted one of the paragraphs and put it in my lecture notes for you. So I'm not going to bother with that now. You can read that on your own. The second item is from a book entitled A Princeton Companion. And it's a book written about famous professors and students who either worked at Princeton University or attended it as students. The book is by Alexander Leach, and he has an entry on Walter Stace, so I copied and pasted a little bit of it for you and put it in my lecture notes. The third item is from the encyclopedia entry I just mentioned, and I'm going to read it only because it has to do specifically with the article that we're reading today and discussing today. It has an interesting origin, and there's an interesting story behind it. So look at page 2 of my lecture notes. Here is James Ward Smith talking about Stace's essay, Man Against Darkness. Here's what he says. In September 1948, Stace published in the Atlantic Monthly, pages 53 through 58, and that's exactly what you read, an article entitled Man Against Darkness. The thesis of the article, which Stace considered neither very original nor very shocking, was that the worldview endorsed by the physical sciences since the time of Galileo is incompatible with Christianity's traditional worldview. Now here's the key part. The violent reaction to this article stunned him. Now that's interesting. Stace published this article in the Atlantic, which was a highbrow magazine. He thought, according to Smith, Stace thought that this article was neither very original, in other words, he wasn't saying anything that hadn't been said by other people elsewhere, and he didn't think it was very shocking either. In fact, he may have thought it was fairly bland. And so when the reaction came about, letters to the editor of the Atlantic and so on, maybe letters were sent to Stace at his Princeton office or his home, he was stunned by the negative reaction to this article. Now, I don't know who was outraged by the article. My guess is it was people who are religious. They did not like reading this article. They thought that perhaps that Stace was insulting them and other religious people. Maybe they thought that Stace was making fun of their religion, and they didn't appreciate that either. So whatever the cause, Stace was stunned by the violent reaction. Now, violent, I'm not sure what that involves. Maybe he got death threats. That happens sometimes. Maybe people were so outraged, so angry at him, that they made threats against him or his family. Anyway, I thought that would be of interest to you. Perhaps when you read this article, you were outraged in some way or felt insulted. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you had a bland reaction to it, like I assume some of his readers did at the time. Now, this essay appeared originally in 1948. How long ago is that? Let's see, 52 plus 21, 73 years ago, this essay was published. Stace later reprinted this essay in a book that was published in the year of his death, 1967. So Stace collected this essay and a number of others and published it in book form. So he must have been willing to get another round of abuse. Right? Once the book was published, almost 2 decades after the article was published, maybe readers of that book who didn't even know about the article published in 1948, maybe they sent him a new round of death threats and hate mail. I don't know. But he published it again anyway. Okay, let's get started on section 1. Remember, Stace did not give these sections titles. I did in my notes. Today I'd like to cover, and we'll see how it goes, I'd like to cover section 1, section 2, and at least get started in section 3. Okay? So we'll see how it goes. I want to make sure I cover enough today so that we can finish it on Tuesday. And I don't want it to bleed over into Thursday's class. I'm going to try to stick to my reading list as closely as I can. So, part 1 of Stace's article, I give it the title, A Fact to be Explained. Stace begins by stating what he takes to be a fact and then wonders about the explanation of that fact. So here's how he begins his essay. He says that the modern world, and remember, he wrote this in the middle of the 20th century. So the modern world he's talking about was the world in the middle of the 20th century. And there's a modern world today as well, but now that phrase applies to the early part of the 21st century. We're now in 2021. We're approaching the end of the first quarter of the 21st century. That's now the modern world. So what is modern changes, obviously, over time. Maybe I should say the application of the term, the modern world, changes depending on when you're writing or talking. Anyway, Stace says that the modern world is characterized by chaos and bewilderment. And it makes me wonder whether that's the darkness of his title. The title of his essay is Man Against Darkness. And maybe he's talking about the darkness of chaos and bewilderment or puzzlement. So Stace's explanation for this chaos and this sense of bewilderment is, and you'll notice in my notes, whenever I quote Stace, I put the page. In this case, it's page 53. That's where the quotation comes from. So I'm trying to stay as close as I can to the things that Stace actually says. And the best way to do that is to quote him periodically to stay on track. Stace tries to explain the chaos and bewilderment of the modern world. He says it's explained by man's loss of faith, his abandonment of God and religion, unquote. So we've got two things on the table. We've got what Stace thinks is a fact, namely a sense of chaos and bewilderment that people experience. And then the question is why? What's the explanation for people being bewildered and feeling that things are chaotic? And Stace says it's loss of religion. It's a loss of faith. It's an abandonment by people, by many or most people, of God and religion. So there are two questions we might ask about this. First of all, there's the evaluative question. And you can see in my notes, this question is the loss of faith, assuming that that is the explanation, is the loss of faith a good thing, a bad thing, or neither good nor bad, which we can call indifferent? Have you ever heard that phrase, good, bad, or indifferent? Indifferent means neither good nor bad. It's kind of a middle ground between good and bad. So if if bewilderment is caused by a loss of faith, we can ask, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Or maybe it's indifferent. The second question Stace tries to answer is, what caused the loss of faith? And that's really the main thrust of this whole article. Stace is going to claim that the loss of faith, in other words, the decline of religion in the modern world, is caused by science, developments in science. As science progresses, people begin to lose their faith. Their religion declines. Okay, so that would be Stace's main explanation for why people have lost their faith. It's science. Science is the culprit, if you will. So let's take these two questions in turn, beginning with the first question. As you can see in my notes, Stace mentions some other people or groups. With regard to the first question, he says, people like Jean-Paul Sartre, who was a French philosopher in the 20th century. He's sometimes known as an existentialist philosopher, and he was an atheist. Jean-Paul Sartre, and also the Catholic bishops of America, and even Stace himself, agree that the decline of religion is bad. The loss of faith is a bad thing. So in answer to the question, is the loss of faith good, bad, or indifferent? Stace's answer is, it's bad. Sartre's answer is, it's bad. And the position of the Catholic Church, the bishops of the Catholic Church, is, it's bad. It's a bad thing that people's faith is declining or disappearing, or that people are abandoning their religious beliefs. Now, not everybody agrees with this. Bertrand Russell, and I mentioned him earlier today, he's the author of the article that I've posted for you that's optional. Russell believes that it's a good thing that religion is declining or dying. And if it ever dies completely and goes away, Russell would say, good riddance. The world is better for it. Russell thought that religion was, on balance, a bad thing, a harmful thing. And the sooner we're rid of it, therefore, the better off we'll be. So on the first question, is the loss of faith good, bad, or indifferent? There's a divergence of opinion. Sartre, Stace, and the Catholic bishops, and I assume many others, believe that it's a bad thing. Russell and others believe that it's a good thing. For Russell, it couldn't occur quickly enough. As I said earlier, the sooner religion dies and goes away, the better, according to Russell. By the way, in case you're wondering whether Stace was a believer in God or not, he says in this essay very clearly, for my part, I believe in no religion at all. So Stace is an atheist in the sense he doesn't believe in God. He's a non-theist. He's not a believer in God. Now, that doesn't mean that he hates religion or that he hates religious people. don't impute those things to him. Just because he personally doesn't believe in God doesn't mean he's antagonistic to people who believe in God or that he hopes religion dies and goes away. Not at all. In fact, he's telling us that religion has good uses. It's comforting to people. It provides people with a worldview. It helps people make sense of the world. And those are good things. So both Sartre and Stace are themselves atheists, but perhaps ironically, they believe that religion is a good thing, and therefore that it's bad that religion is dying and that faith is declining. Okay? Now, Stace agrees with Russell as to the cause of the decline. This is the second question. What explains the loss of faith? Stace agrees with Russell that it's science, the advent of science, or the growth of science, the development of science. And they're not talking about particular sciences or even scientists. They're not blaming biology in particular or Charles Darwin, the great biologist. They're not blaming astronomy in particular or particular astronomers like Copernicus, Galileo, or Kepler. They're not blaming physicists in particular, such as Isaac Newton. And they're not blaming geologists in particular. So when Russell and Stace say that science has caused the decline of religion, they're not blaming particular sciences or scientists. They're saying it's the growth and development of science in general and what it brings along with it that has led to the decline of faith and the decline of religion. Here's how Stace puts it on page 54. I'm reading from the bottom of page 2 of my lecture notes. The general spirit of science and certain basic assumptions upon which modern science from the 17th century onwards has proceeded, unquote. That's what caused the decline. Science in general, the general spirit of science, and certain assumptions that scientists have held along the way. So that's an introduction to Stace's essay. Let's turn to section 2. Once again, Stace does not give titles to his sections. This is his section 2, and I, having read it carefully, have assigned it the title, The Decline of Teleology. So that, obviously, to understand what Stace is talking about, we need to know what teleology is. So let's start down that road. Teleology, which comes from the words telos and logos, has to do with final causes. Now, telos means ends or purposes or functions, and logos means various things depending on the context, but in this context, logos means the study of or the science of. So teleology, in one way of understanding it, means the science or study of final ends or final purposes, the functions of things, the purposes of things. So teleology can be thought of as belief in these final causes or belief in a meaningful and purposeful world. So let's dig a little bit deeper. It's important that you understand teleology because Stace is going to blame science for the decline of teleology. And therefore, since teleology is at the core of a religious worldview, once teleology declines, so does religion, because teleology is at the core of religion. So we need to understand what teleology is. Let me quote Stace from page 54. Again, you can follow along. This is under my heading, Final Causes or Cosmic Purposes. Stace writes, the real turning point between the medieval age of faith and the modern age of unfaith came when the scientists of the 17th century turned their backs upon what used to be called final causes. So Stace is pinpointing a particular moment in time. It wasn't a day or a week or a month, but a longer period. There came a point when the medieval world gave way to what we might call the modern world of science. It occurred in the 17th century. And I realize that's a 100-year period. But during that period, many scientists began to rethink things and to change their whole approach to understanding the world. They shifted from focusing on final causes of things to what are called efficient causes of things. So what does that mean, final cause? Stace tells us on page 54, the final cause of a thing or event is the purpose which it is supposed to serve in the universe, its cosmic purpose. So if you want a handy synonym for the term final cause, you can plug in cosmic purpose. According to the teleological worldview, everything has a purpose. Everything has a cosmic purpose. Everything exists because it plays a role in the scheme of things. And as you can imagine, most teleologists, not all of them, but most of them believe that the universe was created by a being for a purpose or for a reason. So everything that exists in the cosmos exists for a reason. It has a purpose. The purpose it has was given to it by the originator of the cosmos, the creator of the cosmos. And we can call that being God, just for shorthand. So the teleological view of the world is the view that God exists. God created the whole cosmos, the whole universe, and everything in it, and God created it for a reason. God gave it a purpose. And every human being, indeed the human race as a whole, has its own purpose. You and I have a purpose according to the teleological worldview. Now, this teleological worldview goes way back. In fact, it's pre-Christian. Aristotle, who lived several centuries before Jesus and is therefore a pre-Christian, there was no Christianity in Aristotle's world. Aristotle was a teleologist. He had a teleological worldview. Also Plato, who was Aristotle's teacher, had a teleological worldview. It was very common at that time in human history for there to be teleologists. Later, after Jesus, came people like Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas was a 13th century theologian and philosopher. He was steeped in Christianity. He was a Christian theologian, and he was also a teleologist, just like Aristotle. In fact, Aristotle was his favorite philosopher. Aristotle was, in his view, the greatest thinker who had ever lived. And Thomas Aquinas accepted what Aristotle said unless it was obviously false. So what Aquinas tried to do during his lifetime was to synthesize Aristotle and Christianity. It's often said that Aquinas Christianized Aristotle, or perhaps Aristotelianized Christianity. He tried to fuse the two together. And if you ever take a look at his mammoth work, Summa Theologica, a multi-volume work, it's a massive attempt to synthesize his Christian faith with the teachings of Aristotle, which were voluminous, and which were just then, during the 13th century, being translated into Latin from the original Greek in which Aristotle wrote them. So the teleological worldview goes way back in time. It existed before Jesus and after Jesus. And to this day, there are teleologists. Right? I assume that many of you in this class hold the view that the world was created by a being for a reason, and that everything in it has a purpose. We may not know what those purposes are, but we have a brain, a God-given brain. We have senses, which we use to make observations of the world. We have reason, which we can use to figure out what the purposes of things are. Every plant has a purpose. Every animal species. There's a purpose for the rain and the hail and the snow and the sun and everything else. Everything was created for a purpose. That is the teleological worldview. I said that I would post a short writing on teleology. I'll probably get that up for you today, and you can read it, and it will tie in with things I'm now saying. So let's continue in my lecture notes. I'm in about the middle of page 3 now. Belief, this is Stace speaking, belief in final causes thus amounted to a belief that the world is governed by purposes, presumably the purposes of some overruling mind. So the idea is that there is a being, a person, like you and me, but a very special person who is all-powerful, all-knowing, and so forth. That being created the world, sustains the world, and gave everything in the world a purpose. And it's up to us, human beings, to figure out what those purposes are. That's part of God's plan. Okay, and if you look at my next bullet point, humans, like everything else in the world, had and have a cosmic purpose. In Christian thought, they were part of God's plan. So God has an overarching plan for the world, and God created the world in accordance with that plan. Think of it as a blueprint. And God gave everything that exists a reason. Even evil, which will be a topic that we'll take up later in the course. According to Christian theologians, even evil is part of God's plan. So the explanation for evil, why does evil exist, it has to do with God's plan and God's purposes. And we'll take a look at what they might be later in the course. So let's come back to science now, because Stace is claiming that this feature of science killed off religion, or at least started the death of religion, started religion on the process of dying. It may not be dead yet, but it's moribund. It's in the process of dying, maybe close to death. Let's turn to my section entitled Expulsion of Final Causes by Science. Scientists such as Isaac Newton, religious though they were, and Newton was very religious, as you probably know, a great scientist, but also religious. He evidently saw no incompatibility between the two. Or, if he did, he was able to compartmentalize them. His religious beliefs he kept over here in this compartment, and his scientific beliefs and his scientific work he kept in a different compartment over here. Right? That's a possible way to deal with the conflict between them. But maybe he didn't think they were in conflict. Many people believe that religion and science are compatible and that they can coexist, that there's no contradiction between them whatsoever. Anyway, Newton, who happened to be religious, but was also a great physicist and scientist, Newton, according to Stace on page 54, expelled the idea of purpose as controlling nature from their new science of nature. So when Newton was alive and working and doing his scientific investigations, Newton came to believe that the concept of a final cause or a cosmic purpose wasn't doing any useful work in science. So he kicked it out of science and he replaced it with what's called efficient causes. So Newton and others like Thomas Hobbes and René Descartes expelled final causes from science and replaced them with this other type of cause, namely efficient causes. So let's take a look at my next bullet point. Efficient cause replaced final cause. Scientists such as Newton, Hobbes, and Descartes set out to discover the efficient causes of events. They were interested in mechanism. They believed that the world could usefully be viewed as a big machine. there are objects, physical objects, moving around through space. And their goal was to try to state the equations by which we could predict where objects will end up once they're set in motion. If you shoot an arrow into the air with a certain amount of force, it will follow a certain parabola. And you can, in theory, predict where it will land based upon where it starts its flight and the amount of force that is put behind it, as well as the angle at which it is sent into space. So these scientists thought that efficient causes would give us a better understanding of the natural world than this old-fashioned idea of final causes, which comes from Aristotle and other Greek philosophers. So scientists were changing the way they were thinking in the 17th century. Even if they were religious, and Descartes was another religious philosopher who made important advances in science, these scientists, whether they were religious or not, came to believe that the concept of final cause was not useful in their scientific work, so they downgraded it or even cast it out and replaced it with a different kind of cause, which they called efficient cause. So the idea is that if you, for example, strike a billiard ball with your cue, the ball will strike another ball and cause that other ball to go into motion. Those are efficient causes. Now, there may be a final cause to that as well, but these scientists decided we're not even going to talk about that anymore. Right? It doesn't do any useful work in science. Maybe it does useful work in religion, and you can continue making use of that concept in your religious thinking, but when you're doing science, it does no work. So shift over to this other kind of cause, namely efficient cause. And you can see in my notes, I've listed Thomas Hobbes and René Descartes. They were contemporaries of one another. Newton came along after them, and the three of them were among the greatest 17th century thinkers. Okay, so let's talk now about revolution, because really a revolution is taking place in the 17th century. And it's not a political revolution. You're probably familiar with the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and the Russian Revolution, and other political cataclysms. But Stace is talking about a revolution of a different sort. What does revolution mean, the word? It comes from the word revolve. Imagine something revolving. It goes around like this. And if it keeps going, it's going to come back up to where it started, right? A 360-degree movement. But if we go only halfway, 180 degrees, what we've done is we've turned things upside down, right? That's a revolution. In the American Revolution, politically speaking, things were turned upside down. The colonists felt subjugated by Great Britain, and they issued a declaration of their independence and set out to fight for their independence. They succeeded eventually, although it wasn't known that they would succeed. They were willing to make the effort, and they did, and they in fact succeeded. They established their independence from Great Britain. So the world was turned upside down. The American colonies were subjugated, and they became independent. That's, in effect, a turning upside down of how things were. So a revolution in general is turning something 180 degrees. Now, we're talking not about a political revolution, but a revolution of thought. So here's how Stace puts it on page 54. This, though silent and almost unnoticed, was the greatest revolution in human history, far outweighing in importance any of the political revolutions whose thunder has reverberated through the world. Notice what he's saying. This is a revolution in the same sense as a political revolution, but it was silent. Political revolutions tend to be noisy and clamorous, right? Cannons going off and battles and so on, the clashing of arms. This revolution, which is an intellectual revolution, was comparatively silent. And because it was silent, many people didn't even know that it was taking place. I mean, Newton, Descartes, and Hobbes, and people like that, they didn't set out to cause a revolution. They were curious about the world, and they were grappling, reaching out for anything that would help them understand the world. And they simply came to believe at some point that the concept of final causes wasn't helping them understand the world. So they effectively cast it out of their thinking, and they grappled and groped until they found another conception of cause, which we call efficient causes. And they found that that was remarkably productive and very fruitful in helping us understand the natural world. So these weren't revolutionaries, they weren't rebels with a cause, they were simply intellectually curious, and they latched onto whatever ideas helped them understand the world. And unbeknownst to them, or unwittingly, they produced a revolution in thought that has transformed our world and eventually led to something that they may not have intended and may not even have liked, which is the decline of religion. And perhaps one day it will be the death of religion. We don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Turn to page 4 now. We're making our way through my notes. Just to wrap up this subsection, Stace writes that the world, according to this new picture, is purposeless, senseless, meaningless. Nature is nothing but matter in motion. It's just a big machine. That's what I meant by that word mechanism. Events in nature work mechanically, as though they were being guided by an intelligence, but in fact, there's no purpose to it. At least we can understand the world without postulating a purposeful being, such as God. Right? So science can be conducted without reference to God, without reference to any overarching grand purposes. As Stace puts it, nature or the world as a whole is purposeless, senseless, meaningless. It's nothing but matter in motion. The motions of matter are governed not by any purpose, including God's purposes, but by blind forces and laws. Okay? Next subsection, we're just about done with Stace's section 2, which is about teleology. Stace says on page 54 that the new picture of the world created by the likes of Hobbes, Descartes, and Newton, but also many others, the new picture of the world that they produced inadvertently or unwittingly killed religion. Now, I think Stace is being a little bit premature here, because religion, after all, is still alive and well, and if it had been killed, literally, it would still be dead. You can't kill something and then have it come back to life. So I think Stace is exaggerating. He's saying the new picture of the world created by these scientists inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that caused the decline of religion, and whether it ever goes away entirely, in other words, whether it ever dies, remains to be seen. Okay, so when he says killed religion, that's just a little exaggeration. Now, Stace makes an interesting point. He says religion can get on with any sort of astronomy, geology, biology, physics, but it cannot get on with a purposeless and meaningless universe. So it's not a particular science that caused the death of religion. I mentioned that earlier. It's this underlying assumption of all of these different sciences that has started the process of killing religion. As a result, Many people, humans viewed that, said that, or thought that human life came to seem hollow at the center, leading to dissatisfaction, disillusionment, and restlessness. So I hope you can understand the process. Science set in motion events that have chipped away at religion, religious faith. And the people whose faith is being chipped away at, or maybe they've already lost their faith, they have now a sense of disillusionment. They feel bewildered. They feel lost because what was once tying everything together for them, their belief in God, their belief in a purposeful, meaningful cosmos or universe, they now feel rootless. They feel as though they're floating free. They feel as though what once held all of their beliefs together has gone away, and now their beliefs feel disconnected. That's a terrible feeling. It's a feeling of anomie, what sociologists call anomie, A-N-O-M-I-E. It means lawlessness, a feeling as though nothing makes sense. Order has disappeared. Purpose has disappeared. Meaning has disappeared. It's a feeling of absurdity. It's a belief that the universe is absurd, that that there's no grand purpose to it all. Stace says on page 55, belief in the ultimate irrationality of everything is the quintessence of what is called the modern mind. There's a kind of cosmic darkness that has descended on the world as religion has declined. Now, I have a long footnote. A famous novelist whom you should read, he was French, Algerian, named Albert Camus, wrote a number of books. The two I recommend to you are The Myth of Sisyphus and a very short novel called The Stranger. And if you read my footnote, it'll give you some information about these books. Camus, who was an existentialist thinker, said that the universe is absurd. And what he meant by that is that human beings have a craving for order and purpose and meaning, and yet when they look out at the world, they find that the world is empty of those things. The world is devoid of purpose, order, and meaning. And when you put this craving for purpose together with the absence of purpose in the world, you get what Camus called absurdity, a world of absurdity. We want nothing more than this purpose, and yet when we look out and reach for it, there's nothing there. It's a purposeless world. That describes what Stace is describing. Now, Stace doesn't mention Camus, but they were thinking alike in this regard. Camus might explain this absurdity the same way Stace does. He might say it's brought on by science and the decline of teleology brought on by science. Okay, so read that long paragraph on your own. I wrote it, and it introduces you to a couple of works of Camus, which you can acquire and read. I remember reading The Stranger when I was in college, when I was your age. It had a profound effect on me, and has for my entire life. I won't give away the plot details, but you could read the book in one afternoon. And I think it's one of those books where when you start it, you won't be able to put it down. It may be available online, maybe even for free, in English translation. Anyway, Stace doesn't mention Camus. Certainly he had read Camus by the time he wrote this essay, either in the original French in which they were written or in English translation. Stace was a learned man. He probably was able to read and write in French. I don't know that, but I'm just guessing. Okay, let's see how much time has passed. We're almost exactly 1 hour in to this lecture, but that's okay. Let's take another 10 or 15 minutes to get as far as we can into the next section, section 3. And that, I think, will allow us to finish Stace's article on Tuesday. And I'll be doing one more lecture where I post it on Canvas, and we are not going into the classroom on Tuesday. Remember, I'm sorry to keep harping on this, but at least one of you has not been paying attention. We will not be in the classroom until the 9th of September. That's a week from today. Until then, my videos will be posted on Canvas, and that's all you will have, plus my lecture notes. Okay, section 3. This is Stace's attempt to draw out some of the consequences of the decline of religion. The decline of religion has led to people not taking morality as seriously as they once did. So I call this section, here's my title, Inventing Right and Wrong. Now here's Stace talking. Well, there's going to be a quotation in this sentence. The decline or death of teleology led to, quote, the ruin of moral principles and indeed of all values, unquote. It also led to, quote, loss of belief in the freedom of the will, unquote. So the decline of religion, or death, although I think that's premature, the decline of religion has in turn led to two other bad things happening. People don't think of morality or moral values as being objective. They think that moral principles and moral values are inventions. They're not discoveries, they're inventions. They don't exist out there as part of the objective world waiting to be discovered, which was the old view, the view of most religions. According to the new view, the subjectivist view, moral values are created by human beings. They're invented. We don't discover them out in the world. They're not out there. There's nothing out there. It's absurd out there. It's empty. It's devoid of meaning and purpose and value. Moral values, according to this new outlook, are invented or created by human beings. So the decline of religion has chipped away at the objectivity of morals. And many people now believe that morality is subjective. Morality is a matter of opinion. It's not a matter of fact. It's not something that's discoverable by means of the senses or by our reason. It's not like discovering the law of gravity. That is an objective fact of the world that can be discovered and described by physicists and other scientists. But according to what Stace is saying now, the decline of religion has caused people to become subjective in their thinking about ethics or morality or value. People say human beings have created values. If justice is a good thing, it's only because humans have decided that it is. If liberty, the freedom to do as you please, is a good thing, it's only because humans have made that decision. If equality is good, again, it's because humans have decided that it's good. So we can think of this as ethical subjectivism. Let me read what I wrote in my notes. I'll begin with a quotation by Stace and then I'll comment on it. Stace writes on page 55, if our moral rules do not proceed from something outside us in the nature of the universe, whether we say it is God or simply the universe itself, then they must be our own inventions, either individual inventions or collective inventions. Either each individual, like me and you, either we individually create our own values, or together, acting in communities, we collectively create values. But either way, value is subjective. It's not something we discovered, it's something we invented. We created it out of thin air because it serves our purposes, presumably. So at one time in the teleological worldview, people thought of morality as something dictated by God and given to us by God. Moral rules were attempts to find out what God's will is and act accordingly. This is sometimes called the divine command theory of morality. The idea is that God expects us to act in certain ways, and our job is to use our God-given reason to figure out what those ways are. And if we violate God's commands, we could be in trouble. We could be punished by God, either in this life or in some life to come. So the old view that went along with the teleological view is that moral values come from God. They are objective in the sense that they exist independently of us human beings. But once people's faith in God was shaken, and once people abandoned teleology, people began to doubt the existence of objective moral values. And then there are two things that can happen. Either you can put a non-religious foundation under values, or you could become a nihilist. Let me spell that for you. Nihilist. A nihilist is someone who says nothing matters. There are no moral values. Do whatever you want. It's up to you. There are no values discoverable in the world. So once you give up the idea that moral values are objective features of the world, you're left with two possibilities. Subjectivism, which means there are values, but we created them, and we enforce them against each other. Or you could become a nihilist and simply deny that there are any values at all. Now, you might still obey the law because you fear being punished, but it's not because you believe the law has any kind of inherent moral value or any kind of worth. It's just that you fear it. And since you don't want to be taken into custody and punished, you're going to figure out what the law is and abide by it, and so that you don't get apprehended and punished. Now, there are people today who claim that there are no objective moral values. And I mentioned at least one of them in my text. J.L. Mackie, the author of a book entitled Ethics, Inventing Right and Wrong, said in 1977, quote, "There are no objective moral values." So Mackie was an ethical subjectivist. His view is that there are moral values, but that we humans created them. In effect, we got together, we humans, and we decided that in order to live together in peace and in order to accomplish our goals, we need rules. The rules keep us in line, keep us from harming others. They allow us to cooperate with one another so that we all benefit. And those rules are useful. The moral rules that we have and that we live by, according to Mackie, are rules of our own devising, rules of our own making. And we who created these rules can change them if we so desire. That flies in the face of the old view, the teleological view, that moral rules and moral values are discovered in the objective world, that they're somehow part of God's cosmic plan. It won't surprise you that Mackie is an atheist. In fact, the next item that we discuss after we're done with Stace will be an article by J.L. Mackie entitled Evil and Omnipotence. And he's going to argue in that article that there is good reason to disbelieve in God. In other words, there's good reason to believe that there is not a God. And the reason is the existence of evil in the world. So Mackie was an interesting character, an interesting philosopher. He was both an atheist and he was an ethical subjectivist. And those two views go together very nicely. You could say that because Mackie was an atheist, he disbelieved in the existence of objective moral values. And that led him to ethical subjectivism. So if you look at the title and subtitle of his book, Mackie's view is that yes, there is a right and a wrong, but it's not something we discovered, it's something we invented or created. Now let me distinguish a couple of different positions that you might confuse one with another. As I say here in my notes, ethical subjectivism, which is the term I've been using up till now, says that right and wrong are matters of opinion, not fact. Okay? Subjectivism contrasts with objectivism, which means it exists out there independently of us. But subjectivism says moral values depend on us. They come from us. They're up to us. We created them. Don't confuse ethical subjectivism with ethical relativism. Ethical relativism says that right and wrong are relative to something. For example, you might say you might say that right and wrong are relative to societies. So, what's right and wrong in the United States today may well differ from what's right and wrong in some other country today or in some other society today. Okay? So, right and wrong today is relative to society. This one has its own ways. This other one may have a different way, a different set of rights and wrongs. Also, there's a temporal aspect. According to ethical relativism, right and wrong are relative to times, not just to places, but to times. So what's right and wrong today is not necessarily what was right and wrong 100 years ago in this society, or 200 years ago, or even 50 years ago. And what's right and wrong today in this society may not be the same as what's right and wrong 10 or 50 or 100 years from now in the same society. So the idea is that there's no right and wrong that exists everywhere and always. Right and wrong are relative to places or times or both. So you can see, I hope, that both relativism and subjectivism deny what we might call ethical objectivism. Because if right and wrong are built into the fabric of the universe, waiting to be discovered, then presumably they apply everywhere and always. One set of standards for all peoples, everywhere and always. Ethical subjectivism says, no, that's false. Right and wrong are matters of opinion, not objective fact. Ethical relativism says right and wrong are relative to times or places. Now, these two views actually can come together because ethical relativism could be very fine-grained. An ethical relativist might say right and wrong are relative to, can you fill it in? Individuals. Right and wrong is relative to the person. So what's right and wrong for Keith may not be the same as what's right and wrong for you, each of you, or for this other person. So we could think of ethical subjectivism as the most extreme kind of ethical relativism. It relativizes right and wrong not to societies or countries or times or places, but to individuals. And think of that as ethical subjectivism. Now, on page 5, I give a couple of quotations from two very famous, very important, very prominent ethical subjectivists. You may have heard of them. Thomas Hobbes wrote in 1651 the following. He wrote, "Every man calleth that which pleaseth him good, and that which displeaseth him evil." Now, Stace actually quotes Hobbes on page 55. That comes from Hobbes's famous book, Leviathan, published in 1651. Now, Hobbes seems to be saying there that good and bad are subjective. If something pleases me, I'm going to call it good. That's all good means. When I say something is good, I just mean it pleases me. Right? So this mouse is good. If I say this mouse is good, I just mean it pleases me. It serves my purposes. It may not serve your purposes. And if it doesn't, you may call it bad or indifferent, but not good. So Hobbes was an ethical subjectivist. He said good and bad, right and wrong are subjective, rather than objective. Whether something is good or bad just means someone desires it or wants it or likes it or derives pleasure from it. Now, there's another quotation in my notes from David Hume, who came after Hobbes by roughly a century. And I'm not going to read it all to you. You can read it yourself. It's written in that old English style. But what Hume is saying there is that when we make moral judgments, such as saying that so-and-so murdered someone else, we're not describing the world, or let me be more precise. We're not just describing the world. We may be describing the world to some extent, but there's going to be a part of that judgment that is not a description of the world. It's something that we add. We describe the world and then we add, and that's bad, or that's good. That's the subjective element of moral judgment, according to Hume. And he stated it very clearly in 1740 in his famous Treatise of Human Nature. Okay, I'm going to stop here. I had hoped to get to a little bit into page 6, but I've said a lot already today. I think we're still in a position to cover the rest of what I want to cover in this essay. We've gotten off to a good start. I've tried to explain things as best I can, sticking closely to Stace's text. And I'm going to pick up next time with my argument on page 5. I call it my reconstruction of the subjectivist's argument. So we'll pick up with that on Tuesday. Once again, don't go to the classroom until Thursday, the 9th of September. And only half of you will be going on that day. So go back and reread my letter of 22 August. Read it slowly and carefully. Pay attention to it. And then you won't show up in the classroom on Tuesday or Thursday if you're part of the group of students who won't be there on Thursday. Again, go back and reread my letter. Half of you will show up next Thursday. And from that point forward, it's going to be half of you showing up every Tuesday and the other half showing up every Thursday. Until then, the 9th of September, I will not be in the classroom, and you shouldn't show up either. Okay, that's enough for today. Have a great weekend, and you'll see the next video sometime on Tuesday next week.